Hi, I'm Zoe Harper, and 3 months ago my father looked my boyfriend straight in the eye and said, "You seem like a decent guy, Marcus." I just wish my daughter wasn't such a disappointment. She's always been a dreamer, never accomplished anything real. I hate that you're wasting your time on a loser like her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What my father didn't know was that Marcus Rivera wasn't just my boyfriend. He was the FBI special agent who personally recruited me, who fought to get me the highest security clearance in the Bureau, and who had just recommended me for the most prestigious cybercrime task force on the West Coast. But let me tell you how we got there, because the moment my father realized who he was really talking to changed everything. The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, interrupting my morning routine of black coffee and scanning overnight threat reports at the FBI's Pacific Northwest Regional Office in Portland. My mother's voice crackled through the phone with that familiar mixture of guilt and obligation that small-town families weaponize so effectively. "Zoe, honey, your father's birthday dinner is this Saturday. You haven't been home in 4 months." Her tone carried the weight of unspoken accusations, the kind that made my chest tighten, even though I was 3 hours and a world away from Cedar Falls, Washington. I stared out my office window at the bustling downtown Portland streets below, watching people in business suits hurry past food trucks and coffee shops. The contrast between this vibrant city and the economically depressed logging town where I grew up felt more pronounced every time I went back. "Mom, I've been working on a major case. The Bureau doesn't exactly operate on small-town social schedules." I kept my voice gentle, but I could already feel the familiar tension building in my shoulders. "That's exactly what your father means when he says you've gotten too big for your britches since you moved to the city." The words stung because they weren't new. This was the same song, different verse, that had been playing since I graduated from the FBI Academy 2 years ago. "What does Dad mean exactly?" I asked, though I knew I probably didn't want to hear the answer. There was a pause, the kind of silence that mothers fill with sighs when they're about to relay something hurtful but feel obligated to share it anyway. "He just worries that all this government work has made you think you're better than where you came from. He says you act like some kind of hotshot now, but at the end of the day, you're still just sitting behind a computer all day like any other office worker." The irony wasn't lost on me. Just yesterday, I had helped crack a multi-state human trafficking ring by tracing cryptocurrency transactions across 17 different blockchain networks. Last month, my forensic analysis of a compromised server farm had prevented what could have been the largest data breach in federal history. But to my father, I was just playing on computers like I had when I was 12. "I'll try to make it, Mom. I might be bringing someone." The words came out before I had fully decided, but suddenly the idea of showing up alone to face another evening of subtle undermining felt unbearable. "Someone? Like a boyfriend someone?" Her voice brightened immediately, and I could practically hear her mentally rearranging the seating chart and planning interrogation questions. "Yes, Mom. His name is Marcus. He works in law enforcement too." It wasn't technically a lie, though it was certainly an understatement. Marcus Rivera was one of the most decorated agents in the cybercrime division, a former Marine with commendations from 3 different federal agencies and a reputation for solving cases that other agents had given up on. "Oh, how wonderful. Your father will be so relieved. He's been worried sick that you were going to end up alone, married to your job. You know how he gets about family and settling down." I almost laughed. My father's concern about me being alone had less to do with my happiness and more to do with his perception that my singleness reflected poorly on how he had raised me. In David Harper's worldview, a woman's worth was largely measured by her ability to attract and keep a man, preferably one from a, quote, family with roots in Cedar Falls that stretched back at least 2 generations. After I hung up, I sat in my office cubicle surrounded by 3 monitors displaying encrypted files, network security protocols, and a digital forensics program that cost more than most people's annual salary. The cognitive dissonance between my actual life and my family's perception of it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. "Rough morning?" Marcus appeared beside my desk, holding 2 cups of coffee from the good machine in the break room, not the industrial sludge from the main floor dispenser. I looked up at him, taking in the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes. The way his FBI-issued Navy suit somehow looked more expensive than it was. The quiet confidence that came from someone who had earned respect through competence, rather than demanding it through volume. Marcus Rivera was the kind of man who could walk into any room and immediately assess every threat, every exit, every person's motivations, all while appearing completely relaxed and approachable. "My parents want to meet you," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Fair warning, they're going to be a lot." Marcus raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirking up in that half-smile that made my stomach do inappropriate things during work hours. "Define a lot." "Well, my father still thinks I'm basically a secretary with a security clearance, and my mother's going to spend the entire evening trying to figure out if you're serious enough about me to make me stop being a career disappointment." I took a sip of coffee and grimaced. Also, they have no idea what I actually do for work. They think the FBI is like what they see on TV shows from the 90s. And they definitely don't know that I'm your supervisor. It wasn't a question. Marcus had been navigating the delicate balance of our relationship with consummate professionalism for the 8 months we'd been together. We had disclosed everything to HR, followed every protocol, maintained appropriate boundaries during work hours, and somehow still managed to build something real and meaningful despite the complications. "They don't even know you work for the FBI. I just said law enforcement." I paused, considering the implications. "Marcus, maybe this is a bad idea. My family has a way of making everything complicated and uncomfortable. My father especially has this talent for saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment." Marcus sat on the edge of my desk, a gesture that would have been completely inappropriate if anyone else had been watching. But our section of the floor was empty this early in the morning. "Zoe, I've handled terrorist interrogations and cartel negotiations. I think I can manage dinner with your parents." "You don't understand. It's not about being tough or professional. It's about... They have this way of making me feel like I'm still 17 years old and failing at everything that matters to them. And when I feel like that, I stop being the person you know. I become this smaller, quieter version of myself that just takes whatever they dish out." The concern that flickered across Marcus's features was subtle but unmistakable. In the months we'd been together, he had seen me face down hostile witnesses, present findings to rooms full of senior agents, and work 18-hour days on high-pressure cases without breaking a sweat. The idea that anyone could reduce me to feeling small and powerless clearly bothered him more than he was letting on. "What if we approached it like an operation?" he suggested. "We go in with a plan, clear objectives, and exit strategies if things go sideways." Despite everything, I laughed. "You want to tactical plan my father's birthday dinner? I want you to feel comfortable and confident. If that requires treating your family like a hostile environment, then yes, we plan accordingly." His voice was gentle but serious. "Zoe, you're one of the most capable people I know. You've earned your place here through intelligence, hard work, and exceptional skill. Don't let anyone make you forget that, especially people who are supposed to love and support you." The drive to Cedar Falls took us through increasingly rural landscape, past timber farms and small towns that seemed to exist solely to service the logging trucks that rumbled through their main streets. Marcus drove his personal car, a well-maintained but unremarkable sedan that could blend into any environment, while I stared out the passenger window and felt my anxiety ratchet up with every mile marker we passed. "Tell me about your brother," Marcus said, clearly trying to distract me from my spiraling thoughts. "Tyler's okay. He's 4 years older, works as a mechanic at the Ford dealership, never left Cedar Falls, married his high school girlfriend, has 2 kids. In my parents' eyes, he's the successful one because he stayed close to home and followed a traditional path." I shifted in my seat. "He's not malicious like my father can be, but he doesn't really understand what I do either. To him, I'm his little sister who moved to the big city and got too fancy for her raising." "And your mother?" "She means well, but she's completely under my father's influence. She taught elementary school for 30 years, so she's used to managing conflict by smoothing things over and avoiding confrontation. She'll spend the entire evening trying to keep the peace, which usually means steering conversations away from anything that might make my father uncomfortable, including my actual job, my actual accomplishments, or anything that suggests I might have a life he doesn't understand. We passed the weathered wooden sign that marked the Cedar Falls city limits, population 3,847, and I felt my chest tighten. The main street looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college 10 years ago. A handful of struggling businesses, empty storefronts with for lease signs, and the kind of quiet desperation that settles over small towns when their primary industry slowly dies. That's Riverside Diner. I pointed to a low building with faded blue siding and a gravel parking lot. Best coffee in town, which isn't saying much. And that's Harper Insurance. I indicated a small office wedged between a used bookstore and a shop that sold hunting equipment. The Harper Insurance sign was sun-faded and slightly crooked, giving the whole establishment an air of barely hanging on respectability. Your father's business? Such as it is, Cedar Falls isn't exactly a growth market for insurance sales. Most people here are barely scraping by, and those who have anything worth insuring usually work for the county or the state and get coverage through their employers. I felt a familiar pang of guilt.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I know I should feel worse about the fact that the family business is struggling while I'm doing well. But honestly, my father never wanted me involved anyway. He always assumed Tyler would take over, even though Tyler has no interest and no aptitude for sales or business management. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. You're not responsible for fixing problems you didn't create, especially when your help isn't wanted. The Harper family home sat on Maple Street, a tree-lined residential area that had seen better decades. The house itself was a modest, two-story colonial with white siding that needed repainting and a front porch that my mother filled with seasonal decorations. Today, orange and brown autumn arrangements flanked the front door, and I could see curtains twitching in the front window as we pulled into the driveway. They're watching, I muttered, checking my reflection in the car's side mirror one more time. I had chosen my outfit carefully, nice enough to show respect for the occasion, professional enough to remind my father that I had a serious job, but not so formal that it would trigger comments about me putting on airs. Remember, Marcus said as we got out of the car, you belong here as much as anyone else. You don't have to earn your place at your own family's table. The front door opened before we could knock, and my mother appeared wearing her best dress and a smile that was just a little too bright. Linda Harper was a small woman with graying brown hair and the kind of face that had been pretty in youth and was now settling into a comfortable middle-aged softness. She had the perpetually cheerful demeanor of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children, but I could see the nervous energy in the way she smoothed her skirt and adjusted her earrings. Zoe, honey, you look wonderful, and this must be Marcus. She extended her hand with the kind of warmth that made everyone feel welcome, at least initially. I'm Linda, Zoe's mother. We're so excited to meet you. Marcus smiled, the genuine but controlled expression he used in professional settings. Mrs. Harper, thank you for having me. Zoe's told me so much about you. Oh, please call me Linda. Come in, come in. David's in the living room, and Tyler and Amanda should be here any minute with the kids. She ushered us through the small entryway into a living room that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s, but was scrupulously clean and decorated with family photos spanning decades. My father rose from his recliner as we entered, and I felt the familiar mixture of love and apprehension that David Harper always inspired in me. He was a big man, not tall but broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with thinning gray hair and the kind of face that could be either jolly or intimidating depending on his mood. Today he was clearly making an effort to be welcoming, but I could see the assessment in his eyes as he looked Marcus up and down. So you're the young man who's been keeping my daughter busy, my father said, extending his hand for what I knew would be an unnecessarily firm handshake. It was a test, the kind of masculine posturing that David Harper used to establish dominance in every interaction with men he perceived as competition for authority. Marcus met the handshake with exactly the right amount of pressure, firm enough to pass the test, not so aggressive as to escalate into a challenge. Mr. Harper, it's a pleasure to meet you. Happy birthday. Well, thank you. Zoe says you work in law enforcement too. What department? I held my breath, suddenly realizing that we hadn't actually discussed how much Marcus should reveal about his job. In my family's world, law enforcement could mean anything from security guard to state trooper, and the specifics mattered tremendously in terms of how much respect they would afford him. Federal level, Marcus replied smoothly. I work in cybercrime investigation. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. Federal, huh? Like a U.S. Marshal or something? FBI, actually. I specialize in digital forensics and online criminal networks. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's smile became fixed and slightly glassy, and my father's expression shifted through several stages of surprise, confusion, and what looked like calculation. I realized that in their minds, FBI agents were either the heroes from television dramas or the mysterious government operatives from conspiracy theories, with very little middle ground. FBI, my father repeated slowly. Well, I'll be damned. Zoe didn't mention that detail. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's quite a step up from the local boys, isn't it, honey? Before I could respond, the front door opened and Tyler's voice called out, Sorry we're late. Emma had a meltdown about her shoes, and Jake couldn't find his good shirt. Tyler Harper looked like a younger, slightly more athletic version of our father, with the same broad build and the same tendency to fill whatever space he occupied. His wife Amanda was petite and blonde, with the kind of cheerful prettiness that had probably made her homecoming queen in high school. Their two children, Emma and Jake, ages 6 and 8, immediately began exploring the living room with the boundless energy of kids who had been trapped in a car for longer than they preferred. Tyler, Amanda, come meet Marcus, my mother called, clearly grateful for the distraction from the FBI revelation. He's Zoe's boyfriend. The introductions and small talk that followed felt surreal. Tyler shook Marcus's hand with the kind of automatic friendliness that mechanics develop from dealing with customers all day, while Amanda immediately began the subtle interrogation that small-town women use to place newcomers in their social hierarchy. So where are you from originally, Marcus? Amanda asked as we all settled into the living room. Born in San Diego, but I've lived all over. Military family, and then the job keeps me moving around. Military family, my father repeated, and I could hear the approval in his voice. David Harper had never served himself, but he had tremendous respect for anyone who had, and military background automatically elevated someone in his estimation. Marines, Marcus clarified, did 2 tours overseas before I got into federal law enforcement. Well, that explains how you ended up with our Zoe, Tyler said with a grin. Takes a tough guy to handle her stubborn streak. It was meant as a joke, the kind of casual sibling teasing that families engage in, but something about the way he said it made my jaw clench. The implication that I was difficult, that any man who chose to be with me was somehow taking on a burden, was so automatic and unthinking that Tyler probably didn't even realize he had made it. Marcus's smile remained perfectly pleasant, but I caught the slight tension around his eyes. Actually, Zoe's determination and intelligence are 2 of the things I admire most about her. She's one of the most capable people I've ever worked with. Worked with? My father latched onto the phrase immediately. You 2 work together? And there it was. The moment I had been dreading, arriving sooner than I had expected. I looked at Marcus, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. We work in the same field office, I said carefully. Marcus is a special agent in the cybercrime division. The same field office where you do your computer work, my father said slowly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. In David Harper's world, there were clear hierarchies, and FBI special agent ranked significantly higher than whatever he imagined my job to be. Zoe doesn't just do computer work, Dad. She's a digital forensics analyst. She investigates cybercrime and online criminal networks, just like Marcus does. The look my father gave me was a mixture of skepticism and something that might have been embarrassment. Well, that sounds very impressive, honey, but I'm sure Marcus here has the real responsibility for the important cases. The silence that followed was so thick I could practically hear it humming. Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, but I knew him well enough to recognize the subtle signs of tension in his posture. Amanda looked confused. Tyler seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of conflict, and my mother had developed the bright, desperate smile she wore when she was trying to prevent an argument through pure force of will. Actually, Marcus said quietly, Zoe is one of the most talented analysts in the Bureau. She's solved cases that had stumped other agents for months. Just last week, she cracked a cryptocurrency fraud scheme that saved potential victims millions of dollars. My father's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, settling on something between skepticism and irritation. Well, I'm sure she's very helpful with the technical stuff, but surely the real investigative work, the decision-making and leadership, that's more in your wheelhouse. And there it was. The casual dismissal. The automatic assumption that any success I might have achieved was really due to the men around me. The reflexive need to diminish my accomplishments in order to maintain his own sense of how the world should work. It was so predictable that I almost felt sorry for him. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was calm and professional, but there was an edge to it that I had only heard him use with uncooperative witnesses. Mr. Harper, I think there might be some confusion about what Zoe does. She's not my assistant or my technical support. She's a senior digital forensics analyst with top-secret clearance, which means she has access to classified information and leads her own investigations. In fact, she was recruited directly from graduate school because of her exceptional abilities, and she's been promoted ahead of schedule twice because of her performance. The room fell silent, except for the sound of the children playing in the next room and the tick of the mantel clock. My father's face had gone slightly red, and I could see the muscle in his jaw working the way it did when he was angry but trying to control his temper. Well, he said finally, that's quite a story. But let's be honest here, Marcus. You seem like a decent guy, and I appreciate you trying to make my daughter feel important. But we both know how these government jobs work. There's a lot of fancy titles and bureaucratic nonsense, but at the end of the day, someone has to make the real decisions and take the real responsibility. And that's usually not going to be a young woman, no matter how smart she thinks she is. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were surprising, but because they were so perfectly, predictably cruel. This was my father's specialty, taking whatever confidence or pride I had managed to build and systematically dismantling it under the guise of keeping me grounded or teaching me humility. But this time was different. This time I wasn't facing his dismissal alone, and the man beside me wasn't going to let it stand unchallenged. Marcus stood up slowly, and when he did, something about his presence filled the room in a way that made everyone pay attention. This wasn't the polite, charming man who had been making small talk for the past hour. This was Special Agent Rivera, the Marine veteran who had earned his reputation by never backing down from a fight. Mr. Harper, he said, and his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively straighten up and listen carefully. I think you should know that I didn't recruit Zoe because I felt sorry for her, or because I needed someone to answer phones and file paperwork. I recruited her because she's one of the most brilliant analysts I've ever encountered. She has advanced degrees in computer science and criminal justice. She's published research in peer-reviewed journals, and she's solved cases that other agents couldn't even understand, let alone investigate. My father opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. More than that, I didn't just recruit her as a subordinate. 3 months ago, I recommended her for promotion to senior analyst, which means she now has the authority to lead her own investigations and supervise other agents. She's 28 years old, and she's already achieved a level of professional success that most people never reach in their entire careers. The color had drained from my father's face, and for the first time in my memory, David Harper seemed genuinely speechless. Marcus sat back down, his voice returning to conversational tones but losing none of its intensity. So when you tell me that I seem like a decent guy but that I'm wasting my time on a loser, you're not just insulting your daughter. You're insulting my professional judgment, my integrity, and my ability to recognize talent. The silence stretched on until my mother finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. Marcus, I'm sure David didn't mean. Yes, he did, I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since the conversation had begun. He absolutely meant it, Mom. This is exactly what he's been saying about me for years. just never in front of someone who could contradict him with actual facts. I looked directly at my father, and for once, I didn't feel small or defensive or apologetic. I felt angry, and clear, and tired of pretending that his opinion of me mattered more than the truth. Dad, I have top-secret security clearance with the federal government. I make more money than Tyler, more money than you, and more money than most people in this entire town. I've testified before Congress about cybersecurity threats. I've briefed senior FBI officials on cases that I solved. I own my own apartment in one of the most expensive cities on the West Coast. I have a retirement account that's already worth more than most people save in a lifetime, and I'm dating a man who isn't just successful and accomplished, but who respects me enough to defend my achievements when my own father won't. My father's mouth opened and closed without sound, and I realized that he genuinely had no idea how to respond. In his mental framework, I was still the uncertain teenager who needed his guidance and approval. The reality of who I had become as an adult was so far outside his expectations that he couldn't process it. But here's the thing that really gets me, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. None of that should matter. I shouldn't have to list my accomplishments and my salary to earn basic respect from my own family. The fact that I'm a good person who works hard and treats people with kindness should be enough. But apparently, it's not. I stood up, and Marcus immediately rose beside me, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "We're gonna go now," I said, looking around at my family's shocked faces. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. Happy birthday, Dad. Tyler, Amanda, it was good to see you." As we walked toward the door, my father finally found his voice. "Zoe, wait. You don't have to leave. I didn't know." I turned back to look at him, and for a moment I saw not the intimidating authority figure from my childhood, but a small-town man who was genuinely confused by a world that had moved beyond his understanding. "You didn't know because you never asked," I said gently. "You assumed you knew, and you were so confident in your assumptions that you never considered the possibility that you might be wrong." Marcus and I walked out into the crisp autumn evening, leaving behind the sounds of uncomfortable family discussion and children asking why Uncle Zoe and her friend had left so suddenly. We didn't speak until we were in the car and driving back toward the main road. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I should have warned you better about what they were like. I should have prepared you for how awful that was going to be." Marcus pulled over at a scenic overlook about 10 miles outside of town and turned off the engine. In the distance, we could see the lights of Cedar Falls twinkling in the valley below, looking peaceful and picturesque in the darkness. "Zoe," he said, turning to face me, "you have nothing to apologize for. Your father's behavior tonight was completely unacceptable, and the fact that you've been dealing with that kind of dismissal your entire life explains a lot about why you sometimes doubt yourself at work." I felt tears threatening for the first time all evening. It's just, no matter what I accomplish, no matter how successful I become, to them I'm still just the kid who was never quite good enough. And the worst part is, sometimes I believe them. Sometimes I wonder if I really am just playing dress-up in a job that's too big for me. Marcus reached over and took my hand. "Listen to me very carefully. You were recruited by the FBI because you're exceptional. You've been promoted because you're outstanding. You solve cases that other agents can't solve. You identify patterns that other analysts miss. And you do it all while maintaining more professionalism and integrity than most people twice your age." He paused, squeezing my hand gently. "Your family's inability to see your worth says everything about their limitations and nothing about your value. Don't let their small worldview make you forget how extraordinary you actually are." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the stars become visible as the last traces of daylight faded from the sky. Finally, I spoke the question that had been nagging at me since we left the house. "Do you think he'll ever be able to see me differently? Do you think there's any hope that my family might eventually understand who I really am?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I appreciated that he was actually considering the question rather than just offering easy reassurance. "I think," he said finally, "that people can change, but only if they want to. Your father would have to be willing to admit that his understanding of you has been fundamentally wrong for years, and that's a pretty big ask for someone who's built his identity around being the authority figure in the family. He turned to look at me directly. But here's what I know for sure. You don't need their approval to be successful, you don't need their understanding to be valuable, and you don't need their acceptance to be happy. You've built an incredible life despite their lack of support, not because of it. As we drove back toward Portland, I felt something shifting inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's disappointment, like a stone in my chest, always hoping that the next promotion, the next accomplishment, the next milestone, would finally be enough to earn their respect. But tonight had crystallized something important. Their respect wasn't worth earning if it required me to diminish myself to make them comfortable. I was Zoe Harper, Senior Digital Forensics Analyst with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had earned my place through intelligence, hard work, and exceptional skill. I was dating a man who saw my worth clearly and defended it fiercely. I had built a life that was meaningful, successful, and entirely my own. And if my family couldn't see that, couldn't celebrate that, couldn't even acknowledge that, then the problem wasn't with me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free from the need to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their belief. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. Tomorrow, I would go back to work solving complex cases and protecting national security. I would continue building a career that mattered, and a relationship that honored who I really was. I would live my life on my own terms, guided by my own values, celebrating my own victories. And if my father wanted to continue believing that his daughter was a disappointment, that was his choice to make and his loss to bear. I was done trying to convince him otherwise. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Pacific Northwest clarity that made Portland feel like the most beautiful city in the world. I stood at my office window with my first cup of coffee, watching the morning commuters navigate the downtown streets below, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my own choices. The weekend had passed quietly. Marcus and I had spent Saturday exploring the Columbia River Gorge, hiking trails that wound through old-growth forests and past waterfalls that seemed to exist solely to remind you that some things in the world were bigger and more enduring than family drama. We hadn't talked much about what happened at dinner, but we hadn't needed to. The comfortable silence between us spoke volumes about the strength of our relationship and the clarity that sometimes comes from having your worst fears confirmed and survived. Sunday evening, my phone had buzzed with a text from my mother. "Zoe, honey, we need to talk. Your father feels terrible about how things went. Can you call when you have a chance?" I had stared at the message for a long time before turning my phone face down on the coffee table and returning to the book I was reading. Some conversations require the right timing, and Sunday night hadn't felt like it. Now, standing in my office with case files spread across my desk and the familiar hum of the FBI field office coming to life around me, I felt grounded in a way that had nothing to do with my family's approval or disapproval. This was my world, the place where my skills mattered and my contributions were valued. Here, I wasn't David Harper's disappointing daughter, or the girl who had gotten too big for her britches. I was Senior Digital Forensics Analyst Zoe Harper, and I had work to do. The case that had been consuming most of my attention for the past month involved a sophisticated cryptocurrency laundering operation that was funneling money from various illegal enterprises through a network of shell companies and digital wallets. The perpetrators were using advanced encryption techniques and constantly shifting their methods to stay ahead of law enforcement. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had gotten greedy. Greed, I had learned in my 2 years with the Bureau, was the downfall of most criminals. No matter how smart they were, no matter how careful their planning, eventually they wanted more money faster, and that's when they made the errors that allowed people like me to catch them. I was deep in the process of tracing a particularly complex transaction chain when Agent Kevin Park appeared beside my desk. Kevin was Marcus's partner, a methodical investigator with 20 years of experience and the kind of steady temperament that made him invaluable during high-stress operations. "Morning, Zoe. Got a minute?" Kevin's tone was casual, but I caught something in his expression that suggested this wasn't just a social visit. Of course. What's going on? Kevin glanced around the busy office floor and lowered his voice slightly. Marcus mentioned that you had some family drama over the weekend. Everything okay? I felt a flush of embarrassment. The last thing I wanted was for my personal issues to become office gossip or to affect my professional reputation. It's fine, Kevin. Just typical small-town family stuff. Nothing that impacts work. I'm not asking as a supervisor, Zoe. I'm asking as someone who's been where you are. Kevin pulled up a chair and sat down, his voice dropping to a more personal register. I grew up in a tiny town in Nebraska, population 800. My father was a grain elevator operator who thought college was a waste of time and law enforcement was something that happened to other people's kids. When I joined the Bureau 23 years ago, he told everyone in town that I was probably going to end up getting myself killed, chasing criminals I was too soft to handle. I looked at Kevin with new interest. In all the time I had worked with him, he had never mentioned his background or his family. He was one of those agents who kept his personal life completely separate from his professional identity, which made this conversation particularly surprising. The thing is, Kevin continued, it took me about 15 years to figure out that I was never going to prove myself to him. Not because I wasn't capable or successful, but because admitting I was successful would have required him to admit he was wrong about pretty much everything he believed about the world. And that was too big an ask. How did you deal with it? I asked, genuinely curious. Badly, for a long time. I spent years trying to translate my job into terms he could understand and respect. I emphasized the parts that seemed more traditionally masculine, downplayed the analytical work, talked about arrests and prosecutions instead of research and investigation. Basically, I let his limitations define how I thought about my own career. Kevin paused, looking out the window at the Portland skyline. It wasn't until my daughter was born that I realized I was setting a terrible example. I was teaching her that other people's opinions mattered more than her own achievements, that she should be ashamed of being smart if it made other people uncomfortable. That's when I decided to stop apologizing for who I was. Did your relationship with your father ever improve? He died 5 years ago, Kevin said matter-of-factly. Never did understand what I did for a living, never stopped thinking I should have stayed home and worked in agriculture. But by then, it didn't matter anymore. I had built a life I was proud of, with people who valued what I brought to the table. His approval became irrelevant. I sat with that for a moment, understanding the gift Kevin was offering me. This was his way of saying that what I was going through wasn't unique, wasn't a reflection of my worth, and wasn't something I had to carry alone. Marcus said your father was pretty rough on you at dinner. He told my boyfriend that I was a disappointment and a loser, not knowing that my boyfriend was the FBI agent who recruited me. I managed a wry smile. The irony was pretty thick. Kevin chuckled. I bet Marcus handled that well. He was incredibly professional about it, but I could tell he was furious. The whole thing was mortifying. Zoe, can I give you some advice? Kevin's voice became serious again. Don't let your family's ignorance make you question your place here. You earned this job through your abilities, not through charity or affirmative action, or because someone felt sorry for you. You've proven yourself over and over again, and the people who matter in your professional life see that clearly. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my desk carrying a thick file folder and wearing the expression he got when he was about to brief us on a new development in an ongoing case. Morning, Kevin. Zoe, we just got a break in the cryptocurrency case. He set the folder down and opened it to reveal a stack of financial documents. The money laundering network you've been tracking made a major transaction last night. They moved $8 million through a series of exchanges, but they used a digital wallet that we've been monitoring. I felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with a significant development in a complex case. This was what I lived for. The moment when months of painstaking analysis suddenly crystallized into actionable intelligence. Do we have enough to trace the final destination? I asked, already mentally mapping out the investigative steps that would be required. That's what we need to find out. I want you to take point on this analysis. If we can follow this money to its endpoint, We might be able to identify the entire network and make arrests before they realize we're onto them. Kevin stood up from his chair. I'll coordinate with the field agents and get them ready for potential search warrants. How long do you need for the trace? I was already pulling up the relevant software on my computer, my mind shifting into the focused analytical mode that made everything else fade into background noise. Give me 4 hours. If the trail is followable, I'll have locations and account holders by lunch. As Kevin walked away and Marcus settled into preparation for what could become a major operation, I felt the satisfying weight of professional responsibility settling around me. This was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was trained to do, working with people who trusted my expertise without question. The next 4 hours passed in the kind of deep concentration that made time irrelevant. I traced digital breadcrumbs through layers of encryption and false identities, following money as it moved through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and cryptocurrency exchanges. Each transaction revealed a piece of the larger puzzle, and gradually a picture emerged of a criminal organization that was far more sophisticated and extensive than we had initially realized. By noon, I had identified 17 separate accounts, traced funds to businesses in 4 different states, and uncovered what appeared to be connections to a human trafficking ring that had been under investigation by a different FBI task force. The scope of the operation was staggering, and the implications were significant enough that I knew we would need to coordinate with multiple law enforcement agencies. Marcus appeared at my desk, just as I was putting the finishing touches on my analysis report. Please tell me you found something useful. Better than useful, I said, turning my monitor so he could see the network diagram I had created. I found a roadmap to what might be the largest organized crime operation we've encountered this year. For the next hour, I walked Marcus and Director Patricia Valdez through my findings, explaining the complex web of financial relationships and criminal enterprises that my analysis had revealed. Director Valdez was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had earned her position through 25 years of exceptional service, and I had always appreciated her direct communication style and her evident respect for competent work. This is outstanding analysis, Agent Harper, Director Valdez said when I finished my presentation. The connections you've identified between the money laundering operation and the trafficking investigation could break both cases wide open. What's our next move? Marcus asked. We coordinate with the trafficking task force and plan simultaneous operations. I want search warrants for all the identified locations, surveillance on the key players, and a full financial investigation of every entity Agent Harper has flagged. Director Valdez looked directly at me. I'm putting you in charge of the financial analysis for the combined operation. This is going to be high-profile work with national implications. Are you ready for that level of responsibility? The question hung in the air for a moment, and I realized that this was exactly the kind of career-defining opportunity that could establish me as one of the premier financial crimes analysts in the Bureau. It was also the kind of responsibility that would have terrified the uncertain young woman my father thought I still was. Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Good. I'll be briefing Assistant Director Chen in Washington this afternoon. Your analysis will be part of that briefing, and if this operation goes as well as I expect it to, you'll probably be presenting your findings to senior leadership at headquarters. After Director Valdez left, Marcus and I sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. This wasn't just another case. This was the kind of investigation that could define careers and save lives. Nervous? Marcus asked. Excited, I replied honestly. This is exactly why I became an analyst. Complex problems, high stakes, the chance to make a real difference. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see another message from my mother. Zoe, please call. Your father really needs to talk to you. He's been upset all weekend. I stared at the message, and for the first time since Saturday night, I felt a flicker of the old guilt and obligation. My father was upset. The man who had called me a disappointment and a loser in front of the person I cared most about was having feelings about the consequences of his actions. Marcus must have noticed my expression changing, because he leaned forward slightly. Everything okay? My mom wants me to call. Apparently, my father is upset about how dinner went. I set the phone down without responding to the text. I know I should probably talk to them, try to smooth things over, but honestly, I don't know what I would say. What do you want to say? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of my confusion. What did I want to say? For most of my life, the answer would have been whatever I thought would make my father stop being angry with me, whatever would restore peace to the family dynamic, whatever would earn me back into his good graces. But now, sitting in my office with a career-defining case on my desk and the respect of my colleagues surrounding me like armor, I realized that my father's anger didn't frighten me anymore. His disapproval didn't feel like a judgment on my worth. His upset feelings didn't feel like my responsibility to fix. I want to tell him that he hurt me deeply, and that his opinion of me was not only wrong but cruel, I said slowly. I want to tell him that I've built a life I'm proud of, with work that matters and people who value me. I want to tell him that his inability to see my worth says everything about his limitations and nothing about my value. Those all sound like things worth saying. But I also want to tell him that I'm tired of having the same conversation over and over again. I'm tired of defending my choices and my achievements to someone who has already decided they don't matter. I'm tired of hoping he'll change when he's shown me repeatedly that he won't. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So maybe the question isn't what you want to say to him. Maybe the question is what you need from him in order to maintain a relationship. That stopped me cold. In all my years of family conflict, I had never approached it from that angle. I had always focused on changing my father's mind, on proving my worth, on earning his approval. I had never asked myself what I actually needed from him to feel good about having him in my life. I need him to acknowledge that he was wrong about me, I said after a long pause. Not just wrong about this one thing, but fundamentally wrong about who I am and what I'm capable of. I need him to apologize for the years of subtle and not so subtle undermining. I need him to show genuine interest in my actual life and my actual achievements. And if he can't or won't do those things, then I guess I need to decide whether I'm willing to accept a relationship with him as he is, or whether it's healthier for me to limit my contact. It was a sobering realization. For all my professional success and personal growth, I had been clinging to the hope that somehow, someday, my father would become the supportive parent I had always wanted him to be. But hoping for someone to change while continuing to accept their harmful behavior wasn't hope, it was enabling. The rest of the afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of coordination meetings, evidence preparation, and strategic planning. The combined task force that was forming around our investigation included agents from 3 different divisions, and I found myself at the center of it all, briefing senior agents and coordinating with analysts from other field offices. By 6 o'clock, I was mentally exhausted but professionally exhilarated. The operation was scheduled to begin in 3 days, and if everything went according to plan, we would be making arrests and seizing assets across multiple states simultaneously. It was the kind of complex, high-stakes law enforcement work that most agents only dream of being involved in. As I was packing up my desk for the evening, my phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual phone call. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, Zoe, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you all day." Her voice carried the strained cheerfulness that meant she was trying very hard to keep things light and positive. "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine, Mom. Busy with work. We're about to start a major operation." "That sounds wonderful, dear. Listen, I was hoping we could talk about what happened on Saturday." "Your father feels terrible about the whole thing." I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the Portland skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over the Pacific Northwest. "What exactly does he feel terrible about, Mom?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear my mother choosing her words carefully. "Well, he realizes that he may have spoken a bit harshly about your job situation. He didn't mean to imply that your work wasn't important. Mom, he called me a disappointment and a loser. In front of Marcus. He said Marcus was wasting his time on me." I kept my voice calm and factual. "That's not speaking harshly about my job situation. That's attacking my fundamental worth as a person." "Oh, honey, you know your father doesn't always express himself well. He's from a different generation, and sometimes he says things that come out wrong. It was the same excuse I had been hearing my entire life. My father's cruelty was always explained away as a generational difference, a communication problem, a misunderstanding. Never deliberate meanness. Never intentional undermining. Always something that was somehow my fault for taking it the wrong way. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I said. "Do you actually think my job is important? Do you think I've accomplished things worth being proud of?" Another pause, longer this time. "Of course, dear. We're very proud of you." "Then why didn't you say anything when Dad was tearing me down? Why didn't you defend me or correct him when he was wrong about what I do for a living?" The silence stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother spoke, and her voice was smaller and more uncertain than I had ever heard it. Your father gets so upset when people disagree with him, and you know how he is about being contradicted in front of other people." I was just trying to keep the peace. There it was, the truth that had shaped my entire childhood and continued to poison my adult relationship with my family. My mother's primary concern wasn't protecting me from my father's cruelty. It was protecting my father from the discomfort of being challenged. My emotional well-being was less important than his ego. "Mom, I love you, but I need you to understand something. I'm not going to keep subjecting myself to Dad's attacks, just so you don't have to deal with him being upset. If he wants a relationship with me, he needs to apologize for what he said and commit to treating me with basic respect going forward. Zoe, he's your father. Surely we can work this out. Family is the most important thing." "Family should be the most important thing," I corrected gently. "But what we have isn't a healthy family dynamic. What we have is a situation where one person gets to be cruel and dismissive while everyone else pretends it's normal and acceptable." I could hear my mother crying softly on the other end of the line, and it broke my heart. But I also knew that her tears were partly manipulative, a way of making me feel guilty for setting boundaries and standing up for myself. "I have to go, Mom. I have a big case starting this week, and I need to focus on that. If Dad wants to have a real conversation about what happened and how we move forward, he can call me himself. But I'm not going to pretend that Saturday night was okay just to make everyone else comfortable." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the city come alive with evening activities. People were leaving work, meeting friends for dinner, heading home to families that supported and celebrated them. I felt a deep sadness for the relationship with my parents, that I had always wanted but was finally accepting I might never have. But I also felt something else. Relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had clearly articulated my boundaries and my expectations. I had stopped accepting responsibility for other people's emotional reactions to my success. I had chosen my own well-being over my family's comfort. Marcus appeared in my office doorway, jacket in hand and car keys ready. "Ready to head home?" "More than ready," I said, gathering my things. "Actually, I think I'm ready for a lot of things I wasn't ready for before." As we walked out of the building together into the crisp Portland evening, I felt the weight of old family patterns finally beginning to lift from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove myself, new chances to build the life I wanted rather than the life others expected me to settle for. And for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough. The surveillance van smelled like stale coffee in anticipation. I adjusted my headset and checked the array of monitors displaying real-time financial data streams for what felt like the 100th time in the past hour. Through the tinted windows, I could see the nondescript office building that housed what we believed to be the central hub of the cryptocurrency laundering operation. 3 days of meticulous preparation had led to this moment, and every instinct I had developed as an analyst told me we were about to crack something significant. "All units in position." Marcus's voice crackled through the communication system. He was coordinating the field teams from a command post 2 blocks away, while I monitored the digital evidence collection in real time. "Financial surveillance team, what's your status?" "Standing by," I replied, my fingers poised over the keyboard that would allow me to trace any transactions the suspects might attempt as soon as they realized law enforcement was closing in. "All monitoring systems are active. If they try to move money, we'll see it immediately." The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of preparation that had pushed every member of our combined task force to their limits. I had worked 18-hour days analyzing transaction patterns, building case files, and coordinating with financial institutions across multiple time zones. The complexity of the operation had required me to brief everyone from local police detectives to Treasury Department officials, and each briefing had reinforced my confidence in both the analysis and my ability to present complex information clearly and persuasively. More importantly, the intense focus required by the case had given me the perfect excuse to avoid dealing with my family situation. My mother had called twice more, each time with increasingly emotional appeals for me to work things out with my father. I had listened politely, reiterated my position that any reconciliation required a genuine apology and commitment to change, and then returned to work with a clear conscience. Movement on the 4th floor. Agent Park's voice came through the headset. He was positioned across the street with visual surveillance on the building's main entrance. 2 subjects exiting the elevator, heading toward the front door. I watched my screens intently, knowing that if our timing was right, the suspects would have just enough warning to panic but not enough time to successfully cover their tracks. System shows no unusual transaction activity yet. They haven't realized what's happening. Entry teams, you are green for go, Marcus announced. What followed was a carefully choreographed law enforcement ballet that I had helped design, but was experiencing for the first time from the digital surveillance perspective. Through my headset, I could hear the controlled chaos of simultaneous raids happening at 7 different locations across 3 states. Agents announced themselves, suspects were detained, and evidence was secured according to the protocols we had spent days refining. But my focus remained fixed on the financial monitoring systems, because I knew that the real prize wasn't the low-level operatives we were arresting today. The real prize was the evidence that would lead us up the chain to the people who had organized and funded the entire operation. Zoe, I'm seeing some activity on the tertiary accounts, came a voice from Agent Sarah Chen, one of the financial analysts working with me from the FBI's Seattle field office. Someone just initiated a large transfer from an account we haven't seen before. I pulled up the transaction details on my primary monitor and felt my pulse quicken. The transfer was for $12 million, moving from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands to what appeared to be a legitimate business account in Miami. But the timing wasn't coincidental. Someone with access to higher-level information about the organization had just learned about our operation and was trying to salvage whatever assets they could. I've got it, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I initiated a trace on the new account. Someone's trying to move a large amount of money. This might be our connection to the top of the organization. The next 20 minutes required every analytical skill I had developed over the past 2 years. The transaction was structured to appear legitimate, routed through multiple intermediary accounts, and disguised as payment for consulting services. But the digital signatures, the timing, and the amounts involved created a pattern that I recognized from my previous analysis of the organization's methods. Got them, I announced, probably louder than was necessary given that everyone was wearing headsets. The Miami account belongs to a shell company that's registered to the same address as 3 other businesses we identified in the original investigation. This is definitely connected to our primary targets. Outstanding work, Director Valdez's voice came through the command channel. She was monitoring the operation from FBI headquarters, coordinating with other federal agencies, and preparing to brief senior leadership on our progress. Agent Harper, I need you to prepare a full briefing on these new connections. We're going to need search warrants for the Miami locations within the hour. As the immediate excitement of the raid settled into the methodical work of evidence processing and case building, I found myself in the unique position of being the primary liaison between the field teams and the financial institutions that were helping us freeze and trace the criminal assets. It was exactly the kind of high-responsibility role that I had hoped to earn someday, but I hadn't expected it to happen so early in my career. By late afternoon, we had arrested 17 people, seized over $30 million in assets, and uncovered evidence of criminal connections that extended far beyond our original investigation. The operation was being hailed as one of the most successful financial crimes investigations in recent FBI history, and my analysis was being cited as the key to its success. The assistant director wants to speak with you, Marcus said, appearing at my workstation in the makeshift command center we had established in a conference room at the Portland field office. She's been following the operation all day, and she's impressed with your work." I felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. Assistant Director Caroline Reynolds was a legend in the Financial Crimes Division, a woman who had built her career on solving impossible cases and mentoring the next generation of federal investigators. A phone call from her could open doors that would define the trajectory of my entire career. "Agent Harper," came the crisp, authoritative voice when Marcus handed me the secure phone. "I've been watching your work today, and I wanted to personally commend you on exceptional analysis under pressure. Your ability to identify the Miami connection in real time potentially saved this operation from being a tactical success but a strategic failure." "Thank you, ma'am. I was just following the financial patterns we had identified during the preparation phase." Modest as well as competent. I like that. There was a hint of warmth beneath the professional tone. "Agent Harper, I'm going to be direct with you. The Bureau needs more analysts with your particular combination of technical skills and investigative intuition. I'd like to discuss opportunities for you to work on more complex, high-profile cases. Are you interested in that kind of career development?" My heart was racing, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Good. I'll be in touch with Director Valdez about bringing you into some specialized training programs and task force assignments. Keep doing the excellent work you did today." After the call ended, I sat for a moment trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a single operation, I had gone from being a promising junior analyst to someone who was being personally recruited by the assistant director for career-advancing opportunities. It was the kind of professional recognition that most agents spend years working toward. Marcus, who had been waiting patiently nearby, raised an eyebrow. "Good news?" "Career-changing news, I think." I felt a grin spreading across my face. "She wants to discuss specialized training and high-profile task force assignments." "Congratulations! You've earned it." Marcus's smile was warm and genuine, without any hint of the competitive tension that sometimes existed between colleagues who were dating. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve." As the command center began winding down and evidence was transferred to the appropriate processing facilities, I found myself with the first quiet moment I'd had in days. The adrenaline of the operation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep sense of professional satisfaction and personal clarity. My phone, which had been on silent all day, showed 6 missed calls from my mother, and 3 text messages that I could see without opening them contained increasingly urgent pleas for me to call home immediately. There was also 1 missed call from my brother Tyler, which was unusual enough to catch my attention. I stepped outside onto the Federal Building's plaza and called Tyler back. "Zoe, thank God," he answered on the first ring. "Mom's been freaking out all week. She thinks you're never going to talk to the family again." I told her exactly what I needed from Dad in order to move forward. If she's choosing to interpret that as me cutting off the family, that's her decision. I kept my voice calm, but I could feel my shoulders tensing already. "Look, I don't really understand what happened at dinner last weekend, but Mom says Dad feels terrible and wants to apologize. Can't you just call him and work this out?" It was such a Tyler response, well-meaning but fundamentally missing the point. He had spent his entire life as the favored son, the one whose choices were automatically approved, and whose achievements were celebrated without qualification. He literally couldn't comprehend what it felt like to be consistently undermined and dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. "Tyler, did Dad ask you to call me? Or did Mom?" There was a pause. "Mom asked me to, but I'm sure Dad wants to work things out too. If Dad wants to apologize, he can call me himself. I'm not going to participate in this family pattern where everyone else manages his emotions and relationships for him, while he gets to avoid taking responsibility for his own behavior. Come on, Zoe. You know how he is. He's not good at admitting when he's wrong. But family is more important than pride, right?" I looked out at the Portland skyline, thinking about the day I had just had, the recognition I had received, the career opportunities that were opening up in front of me. Then I thought about my father's voice saying I was a disappointment and a loser, and I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. "Tyler, let me ask you something. If someone at work consistently told you that you were incompetent, that your achievements didn't matter, That any success you had was probably luck or charity? How long would you continue working there? That's different. Work isn't family. Actually, it's not different at all. Both are relationships where respect and basic human decency should be the minimum standard. The fact that we share DNA doesn't give Dad the right to treat me cruelly and then expect me to pretend it's acceptable. Tyler was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him trying to process an idea that had never occurred to him before. I just think, he said finally, that maybe you're being a little dramatic about this. Dad says things he doesn't mean sometimes. We all know that. And there it is, I said, more to myself than to him. The family motto, Dad says things he doesn't mean, and everyone else is responsible for pretending that's normal. Zoe, I'm just trying to help. I know you are, Tyler. But the help I need isn't someone convincing me to accept Dad's behavior. The help I need is someone in the family being willing to tell him that his behavior is unacceptable and needs to change. After I hung up, I walked slowly back toward the federal building, thinking about the conversation and what it revealed about my family's dynamics. Even Tyler, who genuinely cared about me and wanted to help, was more comfortable asking me to change my expectations than asking our father to change his behavior. The entire family system was organized around protecting David Harper from the consequences of his own actions. But I was done being complicit in that system. I was done managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being. I was done accepting crumbs of conditional love from people who should have been my most enthusiastic supporters. Inside the building, I found Marcus finishing up the last of the evidence transfer paperwork. The command center had been dismantled, and most of the other agents had already left to write reports or brief their respective supervisors on the day's events. Ready to head home? He asked, looking up from a stack of evidence logs that required his signature. More than ready. It's been quite a day. As we walked to the parking garage together, Marcus glanced at me sideways. Everything okay? You looked a little tense when you came back from your phone call. Family stuff again. My brother called to try to convince me to apologize to my father for making him feel bad about calling me a loser. I shook my head. The irony is just staggering. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face me. Zoe, you realize what happened today, right? You were the lead analyst on a major federal operation. You briefed senior law enforcement officials from multiple agencies. You had a direct conversation with the assistant director about career advancement opportunities. You are literally at the top of your professional game. I know, and it feels amazing. So why are you letting people who can't even understand what you do for a living make you question your worth? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight through all the family guilt and obligation to the heart of the matter. Why was I allowing people who were ignorant about my career, dismissive of my achievements, and cruel in their treatment of me to have any influence over my self-perception? Because they're my family, I said, but even as I said it, the answer felt inadequate. They're people who happen to share your genetics, Marcus corrected gently. But family is supposed to be about love, support, and mutual respect. What you're describing sounds more like an abusive relationship that you're afraid to leave because of social expectations. We reached his car, but neither of us moved to get in. The parking garage was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic from the street above, and the conversation felt too important to interrupt with the logistics of driving home. I keep thinking, I said slowly, that if I just explain things the right way, or if I achieve enough success, or if I find the perfect words, I'll be able to make them see me differently. I'll be able to earn the kind of love and respect that should have been automatic. And how's that working out for you? Terribly, I admitted with a rueful laugh. Every time I think I've finally accomplished something that will impress them, they find a way to diminish it or redirect the conversation to something I'm not doing right. Marcus leaned against the car and crossed his arms, settling in for what was clearly going to be a longer conversation. Can I tell you something that took me way too long to learn? I nodded. You can't earn love from people who are determined not to give it. You can't prove your worth to people who are invested in believing you're worthless. And you can't fix relationships with people who don't think anything is broken. The words hit me like a physical impact, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. For years, I had been operating under the assumption that my family's treatment of me was a problem I could solve through better performance, clearer communication, or more impressive achievements. But what if it wasn't a problem to be solved? What if it was simply the reality of who they were and how they chose to treat me? The thing is, Marcus continued, you don't need their approval anymore. You haven't needed it for years. You've built an independent life, a successful career, and healthy relationships with people who see your value clearly. Their opinion of you is literally irrelevant to your happiness and success. But they're my parents, I said, and I could hear the plaintive note in my own voice. They're people who gave birth to you and raised you. That doesn't give them the right to treat you badly as an adult, and it doesn't obligate you to accept mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. Finally, Marcus spoke again. I'm not saying you should cut them off completely. I'm saying you should decide what kind of relationship you're willing to have with them based on how they actually treat you, not on how you wish they would treat you. As we drove through the Portland evening toward my apartment, I thought about the day's contrasts. At work, I was valued, respected, and professionally successful. I was surrounded by colleagues who appreciated my skills and supported my advancement. I was building a career that mattered and making a difference in the world. At home, I was the disappointing daughter who needed to apologize for making her father uncomfortable by being successful. I was expected to manage everyone else's emotions while my own feelings were dismissed as being overly sensitive. I was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of conditional acceptance were offered, while never expecting the kind of unconditional support that healthy families provided automatically. The choice between those two realities seemed obvious when stated so starkly, but the emotional pull of family bonds was strong. There was a part of me that would always be that little girl, who wanted her daddy to be proud of her, who wanted her mother to defend her, who wanted to belong somewhere without having to earn it. But there was also the woman I had become, confident, capable, and worthy of respect. She deserved better than settling for relationships that required her to diminish herself to make other people comfortable. Back at my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, ostensibly to write the preliminary report on the day's operation that was due to Director Valdez by morning. But instead, I found myself staring at my phone, thinking about the conversation I needed to have. Finally, I picked it up and dialed my father's number directly. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear the television in the background, probably the evening news or one of the procedural dramas he favored. Zoe? Is everything okay? It was telling that his first assumption was that something was wrong. In his mind, I only called when I needed something, or when there was a crisis to manage. The idea that I might call just to talk, just to share good news or maintain a relationship, apparently didn't occur to him. Hi, Dad. I'm calling because Mom said you wanted to apologize for what happened at dinner last weekend. There was a pause, and I could hear him muting the television. Well, yes. Your mother said you were upset about some things, I said. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. It was exactly the kind of non-apology I had expected. Sorry you were hurt, not sorry for the behavior that caused the hurt. Sorry for your reaction, not sorry for my actions. Dad, what specifically are you apologizing for? Another pause, longer this time. I guess I said some things about your job that weren't very supportive. You told my boyfriend that I was a disappointment and a loser. You said he was wasting his time on me. You dismissed my career as unimportant and implied that any success I've had was luck or charity. I kept my voice calm and factual. Is that what you're apologizing for? I didn't mean it like that, Zoe. You know I think you're smart. I just worry that you're setting yourself up for disappointment by expecting too much from life. And there it was, the classic David Harper deflection. He wasn't apologizing for being cruel. He was defending his cruelty as concern for my welfare. He wasn't acknowledging that he had been wrong. He was suggesting that I was wrong for being hurt by his treatment. Dad, I had a very good day at work today. I was the lead analyst on a major federal operation that resulted in 17 arrests and the seizure of over $30 million in criminal assets. I received personal recognition from the assistant director of the Financial Crimes Division, and I'm being considered for specialized training programs that could advance my career significantly. I paused, waiting for some response, some acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. When none came, I continued. This is the kind of work I do. This is the level of responsibility I handle. This is why the FBI recruited me, and why they've promoted me ahead of schedule twice. I'm not playing on computers or doing secretarial work. I'm solving complex cases that protect national security and save lives. That's very impressive, honey, he said finally, but his tone was flat and uncomfortable, like someone reciting lines they don't really believe. Is it, Dad? Because when I try to tell you about my work, you change the subject. When I explain what I do for a living, you dismiss it as unimportant. When I bring my boyfriend to meet you, you tell him I'm a disappointment. I just don't want you to get your hopes up too high. Government jobs aren't as secure as they used to be, and you're still young. You might change your mind about what you want to do. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Clarity. This conversation was never going to go the way I wanted it to. My father was never going to acknowledge my achievements, never going to apologize for his behavior, never going to become the supportive parent I had always hoped for. Dad, I'm 28 years old. I have a graduate degree, a top-secret security clearance, and a career that I love. I'm not going to change my mind about what I want to do because I'm already doing it successfully. There's no need to get defensive, Zoe. I'm just saying that life doesn't always work out the way we plan. I'm not getting defensive. I'm trying to explain to you that your perception of my life and my career is completely wrong, and your treatment of me based on that wrong perception has been hurtful and destructive. I think you're being a little dramatic about this. Families disagree sometimes. That doesn't mean anyone meant any harm. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, the point where I had to decide whether to continue trying to convince him or to accept that the conversation was never going to be productive. Dad, I love you, but I'm not going to keep having this conversation. I've told you what I need from you in order to have a healthy relationship. Acknowledgement that you were wrong about me, a genuine apology for the hurtful things you've said, and a commitment to treating me with basic respect going forward. Zoe, you're asking me to apologize for caring about you. I'm asking you to apologize for being cruel to me. If you can't see the difference, then I think we need to take a break from each other until you can. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the television in the background, some commercial for a local car dealership, and it struck me how surreal the whole situation was. Here I was, on one of the best days of my professional life, having to defend my basic worth to the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally. I think you're making a mistake, Zoe, he said finally. Family is more important than your pride. You're right, the family is important, Dad. But what we have isn't a healthy family relationship. What we have is you being cruel and everyone else pretending it's normal. If that's how you want to see it, I guess there's nothing more to say. I guess there isn't. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, feeling oddly peaceful despite the definitive end to the conversation. I had said everything I needed to say, asked for everything I needed to ask for, and received exactly the response I had expected. There was no dramatic satisfaction in it, no sense of victory or vindication, just the quiet relief that comes from finally accepting reality instead of fighting against it. My father was never going to be the parent I wanted him to be. My family was never going to provide the unconditional support and celebration that I deserved. That was sad. But it wasn't my fault. And it wasn't my responsibility to fix. What I did have was a life I had built for myself, filled with work that mattered, and people who valued me. I had professional recognition, financial security, and a relationship with someone who saw my worth clearly and defended it fiercely. It was more than enough. It was everything I needed. I opened my laptop and began typing my report on the day's operation, focusing on the complex financial analysis that had made our success possible. As I wrote, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction in describing work that I was genuinely good at, work that made a difference, work that I had earned through competence and dedication. This was who I was, Senior Digital Forensics Analyst Zoe Harper, and I didn't need anyone's permission to be proud of that. The Washington Post article appeared online at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, with a headline that made my coffee taste like victory. FBI Financial Crimes Unit dismantles multi-million-dollar criminal network in coordinated raids. The piece detailed our operation with the kind of thorough reporting that comes from careful sourcing and expert analysis. What made my hands shake as I read it wasn't just seeing our work recognized publicly, but seeing my own expertise quoted and attributed. The breakthrough in the case came through sophisticated financial analysis conducted by senior digital forensics analyst Zoe Harper, whose investigation revealed connections between seemingly unrelated criminal enterprises across multiple states. Agent Harper's ability to identify patterns in complex financial data was instrumental to the success of this operation, said FBI Assistant Director Caroline Reynolds. I read that paragraph 3 times before the reality sank in. My name was in the Washington Post. The assistant director had been quoted specifically praising my work. After 2 years of laboring in relative anonymity as a junior analyst, I was suddenly visible to the entire law enforcement community and beyond. My phone started buzzing before I finished reading the article. First was a text from Marcus, who was already at the office. "Have you seen the post? You're famous." Then came messages from colleagues, friends from graduate school, even my former professors, expressing congratulations and pride. The attention was simultaneously thrilling and overwhelming. What was notably absent was any communication from my family. No congratulatory calls, no texts acknowledging the achievement, no emails expressing pride in seeing my name in a major newspaper. The silence was deafening, but for the first time, it didn't hurt the way I expected it to. Instead, it felt like confirmation of a decision I had already made. By the time I arrived at the office, it was clear that everything had changed. Director Valdez intercepted me at the elevator, her usually composed demeanor showing traces of genuine excitement. "Agent Harper, I trust you've seen the news coverage. The Bureau's communications department has fielded calls from 6 different media outlets requesting interviews with you specifically. We've also received inquiries from 3 universities about guest lecturing opportunities and 2 private sector companies interested in consulting arrangements." I felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. "How do you want me to handle the media requests?" "Carefully and strategically. This kind of positive press is gold for the Bureau, especially for our Financial Crimes Division. But we want to make sure you're prepared and comfortable before putting you in front of cameras." She paused, studying my expression. "How do you feel about becoming the public face of digital forensics investigations?" The question hit me with unexpected force. 6 months ago, I had been a junior analyst working in relative obscurity. Now I was being asked to represent the FBI's entire Financial Crimes Division to the media and the public. The opportunity was exactly what I had dreamed of when I first applied to the Bureau, but the speed of the transformation was dizzying. "I think I'd like that very much," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Good. We're going to start you with a few friendly interviews, maybe some trade publications and local news. If those go well, we'll consider national media appearances." Director Valdez smiled with what looked like genuine pride. "Agent Harper, you've done exceptional work, and it's time the world knew about it." The morning passed in a blur of congratulatory conversations and briefing preparations. I was scheduled to speak with a reporter from the Seattle Times about the technical aspects of cryptocurrency investigations, and with a journalist from a law enforcement trade magazine about career paths in digital forensics. Both interviews would be conducted by phone with a public affairs specialist monitoring the conversations. It wasn't until lunch that I had a quiet moment to process what was happening. I found myself in the break room with Agent Kevin Park, who was reading the Washington Post article on his tablet, with obvious satisfaction. "You know," he said without looking up, "I've been with the Bureau for 23 years, and I've never had my name in the Washington Post. Not once." "It still doesn't feel real," I admitted, settling into a chair across from him with my sandwich. "It should feel real. This is the kind of recognition that changes careers, Zoe. You've just established yourself as one of the premier financial crimes analysts in federal law enforcement." Kevin set down his tablet and looked at me directly. "How are you handling all the attention?" "Better than I expected, honestly. A few months ago, this level of scrutiny would have terrified me. But after everything that's happened with my family situation, professional challenges feel almost manageable." Kevin nodded knowingly. There's something liberating about realizing that the people whose opinions you've been worried about don't actually matter to your success. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I felt my stomach tighten reflexively. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family since my conversation with my father the week before, and I was curious about what had prompted her to call now. I should probably take this, I told Kevin, stepping into the hallway for privacy. Zoe, honey, I just saw the newspaper article online. My mother's voice carried a brittle excitement that immediately put me on guard. We're so proud of you. Your father and I had no idea you were working on something so important. I felt a familiar surge of irritation. They had no idea because they had never asked, never shown interest in my actual work beyond dismissing it as computer stuff. Now that my achievements were being publicly recognized, suddenly they were proud. Thank you, Mom. It's been a big week. The whole town is talking about it. Mrs. Henderson from the post office called to say she saw your name in the paper, and Pastor Williams mentioned it during the church announcements. Everyone's so impressed that little Zoe Harper from Cedar Falls is working on these big FBI cases. Little Zoe Harper. Even in the midst of celebrating my achievements, she couldn't resist reducing me to the child I had once been rather than acknowledging the accomplished adult I had become. Mom, I'm 28 years old and I've been with the FBI for 2 years. This isn't a sudden development. This is the logical result of the career path I've been on all along. Of course, dear. We always knew you were smart. Your father feels terrible about what happened at dinner last week. He's been saying all week that he didn't realize how important your job was. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of a lifetime of conditional acceptance. My father felt terrible not because he had been cruel to me, but because he had been cruel to someone whose importance had been validated by external recognition. The hurt he regretted wasn't the hurt he had caused me. It was the social embarrassment of having publicly dismissed someone who turned out to be worth respecting. Mom, did Dad see the article? Oh yes, he read it twice. He's very impressed. He said he had no idea that your computer work was so complicated and important. And what does he want to do about that? There was a pause, and I could practically hear my mother choosing her words carefully. Well, he was hoping maybe you could come home for dinner this weekend. He'd like to talk to you about everything. Maybe clear the air. Has he said that he was wrong about me? Has he acknowledged that his treatment of me was unfair and hurtful? You know your father isn't good with those kinds of conversations, honey. But I'm sure he'll want to make things right now that he understands your situation better. I felt a deep weariness settle over me. Even now, even with my name in the Washington Post and quotes from senior FBI officials praising my work, my mother was asking me to manage my father's emotions and make things comfortable for him. She wanted me to drive 3 hours to Cedar Falls to have a conversation where I would be expected to accept his attempt at reconciliation without requiring him to actually acknowledge his wrongdoing. Mom, I told you and Dad what I needed from him. A genuine apology for the specific things he said, acknowledgement that he was wrong about me and my career, and a commitment to treating me with respect going forward. Has he done any of those things? Zoe, you're being awfully hard on him. He's trying to reach out. He's trying to save face. There's a difference. The silence that followed was heavy with disappointment and disapproval. I knew that in my mother's mind, I was being stubborn and unreasonable, choosing pride over family harmony. She couldn't understand that what I was actually choosing was self-respect over emotional manipulation. I have to go, Mom. I have interviews to prepare for. If Dad wants to have a conversation about our relationship, he can call me himself and start with an apology. Zoe, please don't be like this. Family is more important than any newspaper article. You're right that family is important. But respect and basic decency are important too. I'm not going to pretend that Dad's behavior was acceptable just because my achievements are getting public recognition now. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway for several minutes, processing the conversation and what it revealed about my family's priorities. They weren't proud of me for my accomplishments. They were proud of the reflected glory that came from having their name associated with public success. They didn't want to repair our relationship because they had come to understand that their treatment of me was wrong. They wanted to repair it because other people were now aware that I was someone worth respecting. The distinction mattered enormously to me, and the fact that they couldn't see it confirmed that I had made the right decision in establishing clear boundaries. I returned to the break room to find Kevin still sitting at the table, now reading something on his phone. He looked up as I approached, and his expression suggested he could read the tension in my face. Family still not handling your success well? They're handling it exactly the way I expected them to. Now that other people are impressed with my work, suddenly they want to celebrate me. But they still can't acknowledge that their previous treatment was wrong. Kevin nodded with the understanding that comes from experience. The thing about public recognition is that it forces people to confront the disconnect between how they've been treating you and how the world sees you. Some people use that as an opportunity for growth and self-reflection. Others just get angry that they've been made to look foolish. Which category did your family fall into? Both, actually. My mother eventually came around, especially after she started getting social credit for having an FBI agent for a son. My father never did. He just stopped talking about my career altogether rather than admit he had been wrong about it. I considered that information, wondering which path my own family would choose. My mother seemed inclined toward the social credit approach, wanting to claim reflected glory while avoiding any acknowledgement of past behavior. My father's response was still unclear, though his history suggested he would choose denial over accountability. The afternoon interviews went better than I had hoped. The Seattle Times reporter was well-informed and asked thoughtful questions about the technical challenges of cryptocurrency investigations. The trade magazine journalist was more interested in career advice and the skills required for financial forensics work. Both conversations felt natural and professional, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to discuss my work with people who understood its complexity and importance. After the interviews, I spent some time on the phone with the FBI's Public Affairs Department, discussing strategy for potential future media appearances. The feedback from both journalists had been positive, and there was already talk of additional interview requests coming in from larger publications. The key, explained Agent Maria Santos from Public Affairs, is to position you as both an expert in your field and an accessible representative of the Bureau. We want people to see you as the face of modern financial crimes investigation, smart, thorough, and completely committed to protecting the public. It was exactly the kind of professional identity I had always wanted to build, and the fact that it was happening so quickly still felt surreal. 6 months ago, I had been struggling to get my family to take my career seriously. Now I was being positioned as a national expert and public spokesperson for federal law enforcement. As the workday ended, Marcus appeared at my desk with a bottle of champagne and a grin that suggested he had been planning this moment all day. "Congratulations on becoming the most famous financial crimes analyst in America," he said, setting the bottle down with a theatrical flourish. "I think that might be an overstatement," I laughed, but I felt a warm flush of pride and gratitude. "It's not an overstatement at all. Do you realize what you've accomplished? You've gone from being an unknown junior analyst to having your expertise quoted in the Washington Post in less than 2 years. That's not just impressive, it's extraordinary." As we walked to the parking garage together, I reflected on the strange contrast between my professional triumph and my family situation. At work, I was surrounded by people who understood my value and celebrated my success. At home, I was dealing with family members who could only appreciate my achievements when they were validated by external recognition. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we reached Marcus's car. "Do you think I'm being too hard on my family? My mother keeps saying that I'm choosing pride over family loyalty." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face me. "Zoe, let me ask you a question. If a colleague at work consistently undermined your expertise, dismissed your achievements, and publicly humiliated you, would you continue working with them?" "Of course not. Then why would you accept that behavior from people just because you share their DNA? Family relationships should be held to higher standards of respect and support, not lower ones." Quote. He was right, of course. The expectation that family bonds automatically excuse harmful behavior was exactly the kind of thinking that had kept me trapped in unhealthy patterns for years. Blood relation didn't create an obligation to accept mistreatment, and it certainly didn't require me to prioritize other people's comfort over my own dignity. We drove to a quiet restaurant in the Pearl District, one of our favorite spots for celebrating professional milestones. Over dinner, we talked about the interviews I had conducted, the media opportunities that were developing, and the career implications of suddenly having a national profile. The timing is perfect, Marcus observed as we shared a dessert that was probably too expensive for a weeknight but felt appropriate for the occasion. You're young enough that this kind of recognition can define your entire career trajectory, but experienced enough that you've actually earned it through demonstrated competence. It's just strange to think that everything could change so quickly. A week ago, I was worried about getting promoted to senior analyst. Now I'm being positioned as a national expert and potential spokesperson for the Bureau. That's how real success works, though. You spend years building expertise and credibility, and then suddenly all that preparation converges into opportunities that feel like they came out of nowhere. As we drove back to my apartment, I found myself thinking about the different ways people had responded to my success. Marcus and my colleagues had celebrated it as the natural result of hard work and exceptional ability. My family had ignored it until it became publicly visible, then tried to claim reflected credit while avoiding any acknowledgement of their previous dismissiveness. The contrast clarified something important for me. The people who truly cared about me had been supporting my achievements all along, regardless of external validation. The people who only valued me when that value was confirmed by others weren't actually invested in my success. They were invested in their own social standing. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop to find 17 new emails, including messages from 3 different universities asking about guest lecturing opportunities, 2 law enforcement conferences requesting keynote presentations, and 1 major financial consulting firm inquiring about potential consulting work. The opportunities were overwhelming and exciting, but they also represented a choice point. I could continue building my FBI career along traditional lines, advancing through the ranks toward supervisory and management positions. Or I could leverage this moment of visibility to develop a more public profile, becoming a recognized expert who worked at the intersection of law enforcement, technology, and financial crimes. Both paths had merit, and both would require different kinds of preparation and commitment. What struck me most was that for the first time in my career, I felt completely confident in my ability to choose the direction that felt right for me, without worrying about whether my decision would meet with approval from people whose opinions had once seemed crucially important. I was in the middle of drafting responses to the most promising opportunities when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed my father's number. I stared at the screen for several rings, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity won over caution. "Hi, Dad. Zoe, I saw the article in the newspaper." His voice was different from our last conversation, more subdued and less defensive. "I wanted to call and tell you that I'm proud of you." I waited for him to continue, but the silence stretched long enough that I realized he thought that statement was sufficient. "Thank you," I said finally. "I appreciate that. I guess I didn't really understand what you do for work. It sounds very important and complicated." "It is important and complicated. It's also exactly what I told you I was doing when you dismissed it as computer games." Another pause, this one uncomfortable enough that I could hear him shifting in his chair. "I may have spoken out of turn at dinner last week. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings." There it was again, the non-apology that focused on my reaction rather than his behavior. He was sorry for hurting my feelings, not sorry for being cruel and dismissive. He was acknowledging that he spoke out of turn, which suggested poor timing rather than fundamental wrongness. "Dad, you told my boyfriend that I was a disappointment and a loser. You said he was wasting his time on me. That wasn't speaking out of turn. That was being deliberately hurtful about something you didn't understand. I just worry about you, Zoe. I don't want you to get hurt by expecting too much from life." What exactly am I expecting too much of? A career that challenges me intellectually? Professional recognition for good work? A family that supports my achievements instead of undermining them? You've always been sensitive about these things. I felt my jaw clench with familiar frustration. Even now, even with my name in the Washington Post and quotes from senior FBI officials, he was still framing the problem as my sensitivity rather than his behavior. "Dad, I'm not sensitive about these things. I'm appropriately hurt by being treated badly by people who are supposed to love me." "I do love you, Zoe. I've always loved you." "Then show me. Acknowledge that you were wrong about my career and my capabilities. Apologize for the specific things you said that were hurtful. Commit to treating me with the respect that my achievements have earned." The silence that followed was so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried the edge of irritation that I recognized from childhood arguments. I don't know what you want me to say, Zoe. I called to tell you I was proud. That should be enough. It's not enough, Dad. Pride that only appears after external validation isn't actually pride. It's social positioning. If you were truly proud of me, you would have been proud of my work before other people told you it was impressive. You're asking me to apologize for caring about you. I'm asking you to apologize for hurting me. If you can't see the difference, then we're never going to have a healthy relationship. I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I looked around my apartment, taking in the evidence of the life I had built. Professional certificates on the wall, books about financial forensics on the shelves, a laptop open to emails from prestigious universities and consulting firms. This was the reality of who I was and what I had accomplished, regardless of whether my father could acknowledge it. Dad, I'm not making this complicated. I'm making it honest. And if you can't handle honesty about how your behavior affects other people, then I don't think we have much to talk about. Zoe, you're being unreasonable. I'm being clear about my boundaries and expectations. That's not unreasonable. That's healthy. Fine. If that's how you want to be, I guess there's nothing more to say. I guess there isn't. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The conversation had gone exactly as I had expected it to, confirming that my father was incapable of the kind of self-reflection and accountability that would be required for us to have a healthy relationship. But for the first time, his inability to change didn't feel like my failure. It felt like information about his limitations, not evidence of my unworthiness. I opened my laptop and returned to responding to the professional opportunities that were flowing in as a result of my newfound visibility. Each email represented a chance to build the kind of career I had always dreamed of, surrounded by people who valued my expertise and supported my growth. As I typed responses to university speaking requests and conference invitations, I realized that I was no longer waiting for my family's approval to feel successful. I no longer needed their validation to know my worth. I had built a life that mattered, with work that made a difference and relationships that honored who I really was. The girl who had once desperately wanted her father to be proud of her was still there, somewhere deep inside. But she was no longer driving my decisions or defining my self-worth. She had been replaced by a woman who knew her own value and refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. It was a transformation that had taken years to complete, but in some ways, it felt like it had happened all at once. The moment when you stop needing someone else's approval to feel whole is impossible to predict, but unmistakable once it arrives. I was finally, completely free. 3 months after the Washington Post article, I stood in the green room of a CNN studio in New York, adjusting my blazer and trying to calm the butterflies that had taken residence in my stomach. The makeup artist had done excellent work making me look polished and professional under the harsh television lights, and the wardrobe consultant had helped me choose an outfit that projected competence without being intimidating. In 20 minutes, I would be sitting across from one of the most respected financial journalists in the country, discussing a new cryptocurrency fraud case that had captured national attention. The journey from small-town disappointment to network television expert still felt surreal some mornings. The speaking engagements had multiplied faster than I could accept them. Universities were competing to have me guest lecture in their criminal justice and computer science programs. Law enforcement conferences featured my name prominently on their promotional materials. The consulting offers from private firms had become so lucrative that I was seriously considering a part-time arrangement that would supplement my FBI salary while allowing me to maintain my federal career. Most importantly, Director Valdez had approached me about applying for a newly created position, National Coordinator for Digital Financial Crimes. It would mean a promotion to Supervisory Special Agent, relocation to Washington, D.C., and responsibility for developing protocols that would be used by FBI field offices across the country. The opportunity represented everything I had dreamed of when I first applied to the Bureau, and it had materialized far sooner than I had ever imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who was watching the live stream from his office in Portland. "You've got this. Show them why you're the smartest person in financial forensics." His unwavering support had been a constant throughout my rapid career acceleration, and his pride in my achievements never felt conditional or surprised. To him, my success was simply the natural result of my abilities finally receiving the recognition they deserved. The producer knocked on the green room door, signaling that it was time to head to the studio. As I walked down the hallway lined with photographs of famous journalists and politicians who had appeared on the network, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed, and how little my family's opinion now mattered to my sense of self-worth. The silence from Cedar Falls had been deafening over the past 3 months. After my final conversation with my father, there had been no more attempts at reconciliation, no more emotional appeals from my mother, no more well-meaning interventions from Tyler. At first, the quiet had felt ominous, like the calm before a storm, but gradually I realized it was simply acceptance. They had chosen to maintain their positions rather than acknowledge wrongdoing, and I had chosen my own well-being over their comfort. The result was a clean break that, while sad, was also liberating. The interview went smoothly from the first question. The anchor, Jennifer Walsh, had clearly done her homework and asked informed questions about the technical aspects of cryptocurrency investigations and the broader implications for financial security. I found myself relaxing into the conversation, explaining complex concepts in accessible terms, and drawing connections between individual cases and systemic vulnerabilities in the financial system. Agent Harper, Walsh said during the final segment, "You've become something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles, with major cases under your belt and speaking engagements at prestigious institutions. What advice would you give to young people who might be interested in following a similar career path?" The question gave me an opportunity to address something that had been on my mind throughout my recent success. I think the most important thing is to believe in your own abilities, even when other people don't see your potential. There will always be people who want to diminish your achievements or convince you that you're not qualified for the opportunities you're pursuing. The key is to focus on developing your skills, doing excellent work, and surrounding yourself with people who recognize and support your growth. That sounds like advice born from personal experience. I smiled, thinking about the journey from my father's dismissive comments to this moment of national recognition. It absolutely is. Success often requires you to stop seeking approval from people who are determined not to give it, and start building relationships with people who value what you bring to the table. After the interview, I walked through Midtown Manhattan toward my hotel, feeling the satisfaction that comes from representing your profession well on a national stage. The producer had mentioned that they'd received positive feedback during the broadcast and would likely invite me back for future segments on financial crimes. The exposure would only enhance my growing reputation as a subject matter expert and thought leader in the field. My phone rang as I waited for the light to change at a busy intersection. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Cedar Falls area code, and I almost declined the call. But something made me answer. "Zoe? This is Mrs. Henderson from the post office." The voice was elderly and slightly shaky, but warm with genuine affection. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the phone book." Mrs. Henderson had been a fixture in Cedar Falls for as long as I could remember. A kind woman who had watched me grow up and always had a friendly word when I came in with my mother to mail packages or buy stamps. "Of course I don't mind, Mrs. Henderson. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine, dear. I just wanted to tell you how proud the whole town is of you. We saw you on the television just now, and you looked so professional and smart. Everyone's been talking about how impressive you are." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with my family's approval or disapproval. This was recognition from someone who had known me as a child and was genuinely happy to see me succeed as an adult. "That's very kind of you to say. It means a lot to hear that. Your parents must be just bursting with pride. I can't imagine how exciting it must be for them to see their daughter on national television, talking about such important work." The comment hung in the air, and I realized that Mrs. Henderson had no idea about the rift in my family. In a small town like Cedar Falls, family conflicts were usually kept private, and the public face was always one of unity and support. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you something? What do people in town actually know about what I do for work?" "Well, everyone knows you work for the FBI in the big city, and we've all seen the newspaper articles about your cases. People are very impressed, dear. You've made quite a name for yourself." Have my parents talked about my work around town? There was a pause, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. Well, your mother mentions it sometimes when she comes in. She seems very proud. Your father... Well, you know how men can be about these things. He's probably proud but doesn't know how to express it properly. I realized that even Mrs. Henderson, with her decades of small-town wisdom, was operating under the assumption that parental pride was automatic, and that any apparent lack of enthusiasm from my father was simply a communication issue, rather than a reflection of his actual attitude. Mrs. Henderson, I really appreciate you calling. It means more than you know to hear that people in Cedar Falls are following my career. Of course, dear. You've always been special, and it's wonderful to see you doing so well. Your grandmother would have been so proud. After we hung up, I continued walking through the bustling streets of Manhattan, thinking about the different kinds of recognition and validation that had shaped my journey. There was the professional acknowledgement from colleagues and supervisors who understood my work and valued my contributions. There was the public recognition that came from media appearances and expert testimony. And then there was this simpler, more personal form of pride from people who had watched me grow up and were genuinely happy to see me succeed. What struck me was how little my parents' approval mattered in the context of all this other support and recognition. Their inability to celebrate my achievements said everything about their limitations and nothing about my worth. I had built a life filled with people who saw my value clearly, and their opinion was the only one that mattered. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to find an email that made my heart race with excitement. The message was from Dr. Sarah Chen, the Dean of the Criminal Justice Program at Stanford University, formally inviting me to join their faculty as a visiting lecturer for the upcoming academic year. The position would allow me to maintain my FBI role while teaching graduate courses in financial forensics and developing new curriculum for digital investigations. The opportunity represented everything I had ever wanted. The chance to shape the next generation of investigators while continuing my own casework, the prestige of being associated with one of the country's premier universities, and the intellectual stimulation of academic research, combined with practical law enforcement experience. I was drafting my acceptance email when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Marcus's name, and I answered with genuine excitement. "Did you see the Stanford offer?" I asked without preamble. "I did, and it's incredible. Congratulations on becoming Professor Harper, in addition to Agent Harper." His voice carried the kind of unqualified enthusiasm that I had come to treasure. "When do you start?" "The fall semester, if I accept. It would mean splitting time between San Francisco and wherever the FBI decides to station me." I paused, realizing the geographical implications. "Marcus, this could mean significant changes to our living situation." "Zoe, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. We'll figure out the logistics. The important thing is that you do what's best for your career." His immediate, unconditional support contrasted sharply with the way my family had always approached my professional decisions. Where they had seen threats to their comfort or status, Marcus saw opportunities for my growth and fulfillment. We talked for another hour about the practical aspects of the Stanford position, the potential for research collaborations, and the long-term implications for my career trajectory. By the time we hung up, I had made my decision. I was going to accept the visiting lecturer position and embrace whatever changes it brought to my life. The next morning, I flew back to Portland feeling more confident about my future than I had ever felt before. The plane descended through the familiar cloud cover that perpetually shrouded the Pacific Northwest, and as the city came into view below, I felt a sense of coming home to a place where I was valued and understood. At the office, news of my television appearance had generated a buzz of congratulations and good-natured teasing about my newfound celebrity status. Director Valdez called me into her office to discuss the positive feedback the Bureau had received about my media work, and to formally offer me the national coordinator position in Washington. "Agent Harper, you've become exactly what we hoped for when we recruited you. A technical expert who can also serve as a public face for our financial crimes work. The coordinator position would capitalize on that combination of skills and give you a platform to influence policy at the national level." I looked at the formal offer letter she handed me, with its impressive title and substantial salary increase. 6 months ago, receiving this offer would have felt like the culmination of all my professional dreams. Now, it felt like one excellent option among several, which was a luxury I had never expected to have so early in my career. Director Valdez, I'm honored by the offer, and I'd like some time to consider it alongside another opportunity that's just come up. The Stanford position? I heard through the grapevine that they were interested in you. She smiled knowingly. Agent Harper, the fact that you have competing offers from both the FBI and Stanford University is a testament to how far you've come. Whatever you decide, you should feel proud of creating those choices for yourself. That afternoon, I drove up the Columbia River Gorge to a hiking trail that Marcus and I had discovered during one of our weekend explorations. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and the sound of waterfalls provided a peaceful backdrop for the decision I needed to make about my future. As I walked along the forest path, I thought about the different versions of myself that had brought me to this moment. There was the uncertain graduate student who had applied to the FBI, hoping for stable employment and interesting work. There was the junior analyst who had struggled to prove herself worthy of complex cases and supervisory respect. There was the daughter who had spent years seeking approval from parents who were determined not to give it. And now there was this new version, a recognized expert in her field, comfortable on national television, courted by prestigious institutions, confident in her abilities and clear about her worth. This woman didn't need anyone's permission to pursue opportunities or validation to know she deserved them. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I was surprised to see that it was from Tyler. We hadn't communicated since his attempt to mediate between me and our father months earlier. Saw you on CNN yesterday. You looked really professional and smart. Mom and Dad were watching too. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what response was appropriate. Part of me wanted to ask how my parents had reacted, whether they had expressed any pride or acknowledgement of my expertise. But a larger part of me realized that their reaction was no longer relevant to my happiness or self-perception. I typed back a simple thank you and put my phone away. When I reached the overlook at the end of the trail, I sat on a wooden bench and looked out over the gorge, thinking about the choices that lay ahead of me. The FBI coordinator position would establish me as a leader in federal law enforcement and give me influence over national policy. The Stanford position would allow me to shape academic research and train future investigators while maintaining my casework. Both opportunities represented professional success beyond anything I had imagined when I first moved to Portland. Both would surround me with people who valued my expertise and supported my growth. Both would allow me to continue building a life that reflected my values and interests rather than other people's expectations. As the sun began to set over the Pacific Northwest landscape, I realized that the specific choice between opportunities mattered less than the fact that I was in a position to choose at all. I had built a career based on competence and integrity, developed relationships with people who saw my worth clearly, and learned to trust my own judgment over other people's opinions. The path back to the parking lot wound through dense forest that filtered the dying light into a soft, golden glow. As I walked, I felt a deep sense of peace about the journey that had brought me here, and excitement about the adventures that lay ahead. My phone rang one more time as I reached my car. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and I almost declined the call. But something made me answer. Is this Agent Zoe Harper? The voice was professional but friendly, with a slight southern accent. Yes, this is Agent Harper. Agent Harper, this is Detective Maria Rodriguez with the Atlanta Police Department. I've been following your work on cryptocurrency investigations, and we have a case here that could really use your expertise. Would you be interested in consulting with us on a complex financial fraud scheme? I smiled as I started my car and began the drive back to Portland. Professional recognition, interesting work, and the opportunity to make a difference in cases across the country. It was exactly the career I had always dreamed of building. Detective Rodriguez, I'd be very interested in hearing about your case. Let me give you my email, and you can send me the details. As I drove through the darkening landscape toward the city lights of Portland, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you built something worthwhile with your life. The approval I had once desperately sought from people who were determined not to give it had been replaced by genuine respect from colleagues who understood the value of my work. The girl who had once needed her father to be proud of her was still there, somewhere deep inside. But she no longer drove my decisions or defined my worth. She had been replaced by a woman who knew her own value and had learned to trust her own judgment about what mattered and what didn't. I was finally completely free to be exactly who I was meant to be, and that person was more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.